Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to unpack something truly fascinating, something that really challenges a pretty common perception. We often treat money like this incredibly complex math problem, right? Something you got to leave to the Wall Street types, the super smart folks, or, people with finance degrees. But what if success with money has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are? And, everything to do with something far more, accessible. How you behave.
That's exactly it. That's the core idea we're diving into today, drawing a lot from the brilliant insights in the psychology of money. It really reframes how we think about money, not as this hard science with rigid formulas.
Yeah, not just numbers on a page.
Exactly. But more as a soft skill. It's about navigating your emotions, understanding the nuances, recognizing your own personal history. All those psychological bits that, drive our choices. What we think we know intellectually about money often tells us absolutely nothing about what actually happens in our heads when we try to act on it.
That's a really interesting way to put it, a soft skill. So if it's less about the calculations and more about our psychology, what's our goal here today? Are we trying to change how you think about money, or is it more practical, like how you act day to day?
Definitely the latter, though arguably you kind of need the first one to get to the second, right?
Makes sense.
Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack these sometimes surprising insights and pull out practical, actionable lessons, stuff for your daily financial life. We'll look at some powerful stories, examples that show how your own unique experiences, those hidden biases, even maybe your deepest fears, how they shape your relationship with money. And understanding this isn't just, interesting theory. It's really the key to maybe getting to greater financial well-being and ultimately maybe just being happier.
Okay, I'm in. So where do we start? This sounds like it could touch a lot of different areas.
Let's start with a really foundational idea from the book. No one's crazy.
No one's crazy. Okay, on the surface, that sounds maybe a bit too simple, but I guess it holds a deeper truth about financial decisions.
It absolutely does. It's one of the most powerful takeaways, I think. What it means is that every single financial choice someone makes, no matter how baffling or, crazy it might seem to you, it makes perfect sense to the person actually making it.
Why? How?
Because it's filtered through their completely unique life experiences, their own personal mental model of how the world works, as the book puts it.
Right. So what looks totally irrational to me could be perfectly logical to someone else, just based on their background, their history.
Exactly. The book is this incredible contrast. Two very different people. One was this super successful tech executive, a genius apparently, designed key parts for Wi-Fi routers, made a fortune.
Okay, sounds impressive.
But his relationship with money was, bizarre. He'd carry around bricks of $100 bills, boast constantly. Get this. Once, he apparently skipped thousands of dollars in gold coins across the ocean like stones, just for fun.
Wow. Seriously. Gold coins.
Yep. And then days later, he'd absolutely lose it at a hotel manager over a $500 lamp charge, throwing $5,000 cash at them in anger. Years later, he went broke.
Okay, that definitely sounds unpredictable. And the contrast.
On the complete other end of the spectrum, you have Ronald Reed, a humble janitor from rural Vermont. First in his family to finish high school, hitchhiked to campus every day.
Wow.
Worked 25 years at a gas station, then another 17 years sweeping floors at JCPenney, bought a modest house for $12,000 when he was 38, lived there his whole life.
Okay, a very different picture.
But when he died at 92, international headlines. This quiet, humble janitor had somehow accumulated over $8 million.
$8 million? How?
His secret was just simple saving and patiently investing in blue-chip stocks for decades. He didn't have a fancy education, no business savvy like, say, Richard Piscone. Piscone was a Harvard MBA, a Merrill Lynch executive, retired young, but then lost his mansions to foreclosure later on.
That's incredible. Reed the janitor beats the Harvard MBA.
Reed's patience and simplicity just completely eclipsed Piscone's intelligence, education, connections, all of it.
That story really sticks with you. It makes you question everything, especially in finance, where credentials seem so important. How does someone like Reed outperform the supposed expert? What does that tell us about money?
It powerfully shows that financial success really is a soft skill. It's rooted deeply in behavior, patience, discipline, perspective, not just raw intelligence or, book smarts. And for you listening, this is so important. Your own lifetime investment decisions are often heavily anchored to whatever you experienced early in your adult life.
Anchored. How so?
Well, if you grew up when inflation was really high, you might be less likely to invest heavily in bonds later on, right? Because you remember how inflation ate away at their value.
Okay, yeah.
Conversely, if you came of age during a huge stock market boom, you're probably going to be more comfortable putting more money into stocks throughout your life. It's often less about how smart you are analyzing the market today and more about the dumb luck of when and where you were born, as the book puts it. Those early experiences just stick.
And that completely changes how we should view other people's financial choices and even our own. Think about JFK. The book mentions he had literally no firsthand knowledge of the Depression. His wealthy family actually did better during that time, bought bigger houses, hired more staff.
Wow, really?
He learned about the Depression by reading books at Harvard, which just shows how dramatically different formative experiences lead to vastly different views on the economy, on risk, on what feels safe or dangerous. You just can't replicate the feeling of fear and uncertainty from reading about it.
Absolutely. And if our personal experiences shape us so much, then we see it play out in behavior that looks, well, irrational from the outside. Take lottery tickets. Americans spend a staggering amount on them, more than on movies, video games, music, sports, and books combined.
That's wild. And who's buying them the most?
It's typically low-income households. They spend, on average, something like $412 a year, which is 4 times more than high-income groups. And this is happening while, stats show around 40% of Americans can't easily come up with $400 for an emergency.
So on the surface, it looks totally illogical, spending hundreds on lottery tickets when you don't have an emergency fund.
Exactly. It seems bewildering, but the book offers a different perspective. For people who maybe aren't living the dream financially, buying that ticket isn't a cold calculation. It's paying for hope.
Oh.
Yeah, the hope of getting the good things, security, comfort, freedom that maybe wealthier people take for granted. It's an emotional purchase, a tangible dream, not a rational investment strategy.
That reframes it completely. It's buying a feeling.
It is. And let's not forget, so many of the financial tools we rely on today are actually really new.
Like what?
Well, the 401k, right, the backbone of American retirement saving, didn't even exist until 1978.
78? That's surprisingly recent?
And the Roth IRA, that came along in 1998, barely old enough to, legally drink in the U.S. Index funds are less than 50 years old. Even widespread consumer credit, mortgages, car loans, that really only took off after World War II.
So we haven't exactly had generations to figure this stuff out.
Precisely. We're all, to some extent, newbies navigating parts of this system. So when people make financial mistakes, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised or judgmental. We just don't have centuries of ingrained wisdom for these specific tools.
Okay, so understanding this no one's crazy principle, that our experiences shape us, that the system is relatively new.
Yeah.
What are the practical takeaways for you listening right now? How do you use this in daily life?
Okay, 2 key things, I think. First, cultivate empathy. Seriously, when you see someone else making a financial choice that just makes you shake your head, pause. Try to recognize that their decision is shaped by their unique mental model built from their history. It really helps dial down the judgment and foster understanding, not just for them, but maybe for your past self, too.
That's a good point. Less judgment, more curiosity. And the second thing, practice self-awareness. Turn that lens inward. Reflect on your own tiny sliver of experience, as the book calls it. How did your upbringing, your early adult years, shape your beliefs about money, risk, saving?
Okay.
Understanding those deep-seated anchors can help you make more conscious, deliberate decisions today, rather than just reacting based on old programming or biases you didn't even know you had. You can start to question your own crazy tendencies before they lead you somewhere you regret.
Right. Understand your own programming before you try to rewrite it. Makes sense. Okay, so if our personal histories shape so much, how much is actually under our control when it comes to money? Which leads us to another couple of big unseen forces: luck and risk.
Ah, yes, luck and risk, always lurking in the background. I love that quote from NYU professor Scott Galloway you mentioned. Nothing is as good or as bad as it seems.
It's such a great line because it hits on how incredibly hard it is to untangle skill from just chance. Take Bill Gates, obviously a symbol of massive success. The book argues he benefited from what it calls 1 in a million luck.
How so? Beyond just being smart and driven.
Well, he happened to attend one of the only high schoolers in the entire world that had a computer back in 1968, Lakeside School. They had this teletype machine hooked up to a mainframe. Most universities didn't have anything like that then. When you think about how many millions of high school-age kids there were globally, and only about 300 went to Lakeside. His access to that specific computer at that specific time was statistically incredibly fortunate, a 1 in a million shot.
Wow, I never thought about it quite like that. That specific access was key. But there has to be a flip side, right? Risk.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to see both sides. For every Bill Gates luck story, there's often a counter story highlighting risk. Consider Kent Evans. He was a close friend of Gates at Lakeside, apparently just as smart, just as ambitious. Gates himself said they were always scheming about the future together.
So he could have been a co-founder.
Easily could have been a founding partner of Microsoft, but he died in a mountaineering accident before they even graduated high school. The odds of that. Also roughly 1 in a million.
Oh, man.
So you see, the same force luck or risk, same magnitude, 1 in a million, but working in completely opposite directions. It just powerfully shows how much outcomes are guided by forces totally beyond our individual effort.
It really makes you question how much credit or blame we can truly assign.
Exactly, and it makes it incredibly difficult to attribute success purely to skill or failure only to bad decisions. Economist Robert Shiller, a Nobel winner, apparently said he really wanted to figure out the exact role of luck in successful outcomes. But it's so hard to measure, and honestly, pointing out someone's luck can sound, well, jealous or dismissive, right?
Yeah, it can be awkward.
But ignoring luck in success or risk in failure is just a massive oversight. There's this finding by economist Bhaskar Mazumdar that incomes among brothers are actually more correlated than their height or weight.
Really? More than genetics like height.
Yeah. But interestingly, rich brothers often don't believe this applies to them. We really want to believe our success is entirely our own doing. It's human nature.
Definitely. And it's also hard to learn the right lessons when we can't easily separate repeatable skill from just random chance. Think about those old business titans like Cornelius Vanderbilt or John D. Rockefeller. Their actions, sometimes blatantly illegal, often get romanticized as just cunning business smarts.
Right. Like Vanderbilt supposedly saying you couldn't run a railroad following New York state laws. He was wildly successful, so it's tempting to see that as some kind of sage advice.
But it's crazy, right?
Of course. The line between bold and reckless is incredibly thin, and usually it's only visible with hindsight. Nobody would seriously advise breaking the law as a business strategy today. Vanderbilt's story could easily have ended very differently in jail.
Good point.
And even Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, Buffett's mentor, most of his own investing success came from one huge holding in Geico stock, which, by his own admission, broke almost every diversification rule he himself taught.
So is that luck? Or one genius move that defied his own logic?
Exactly. It's hard to tell, right? And that difficulty in identifying the why behind success or failure is one of the biggest hurdles when we try to learn about managing money, especially when we try to copy our heroes.
Okay, so knowing that luck and risk play such a huge, often invisible role, how do you apply this? How can you, listening now, become a better student of success and failure without falling into these traps?
Good question. First, the book suggests practicing strategic admiration. Be really careful who you praise and look up to.
Meaning?
Well, those extreme examples, the billionaires, the spectacular flameouts, they're often the least useful lessons for your own life. Why? Because their outcomes are much more likely to be heavily skewed by those extreme ends of luck or risk.
Okay, so don't just chase the outliers.
Right. Instead, focus on broad patterns of success and failure that are more common, more repeatable, and more actionable for an average person. For instance, understanding that having control over your time generally leads to more happiness. That's a broad, applicable pattern. Trying to perfectly replicate Warren Buffett's specific stock picks from 1975, not so much.
Makes sense. Focus on the principles, not the exact extreme examples.
Yeah.
What else?
Second, and this is crucial, practice self-forgiveness when things go wrong. Bill Gates famously said, "Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. But failure can be a lousy teacher too, because it can seduce smart people into thinking their decisions were absolutely terrible when sometimes They just got unlucky. They hit the wrong side of risk.
So don't automatically beat yourself up.
Exactly. It's possible you made a perfectly sensible decision that just didn't pan out because of factors outside your control. Acknowledging the role of risk helps you avoid that trap. It lets you learn from mistakes without getting completely demoralized and stops you from thinking a decision was awful when maybe it was reasonable given what you knew at the time. Just remember Galloway's line. Nothing is ever quite as good or quite as bad as it seems in the moment.
Okay, that's really helpful. Acknowledge luck, acknowledge risk, be careful who you emulate, and forgive yourself when things inevitably go sideways sometimes.
Precisely. Which brings us to another key idea, especially given how much is outside our control. How do you find stability in all this randomness? Maybe the answer isn't about controlling more, but about knowing when you just have enough.
Ah, the paradox of enough. This feels like it cuts against our basic instincts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the drive for more, more, more.
It really does. The book argues that maybe the greatest financial skill isn't actually accumulating the absolute most, but knowing when to stop chasing. Avoiding that insatiable hunger for more that can, ironically, push you towards ruin.
That's powerful. I remember that amazing anecdote the book shares from Kurt Vonnegut. He's at a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager.
Right, and he tells his friend Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22,
that their host made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his massively popular novel over its entire history.
And Heller's reply is just perfect. Yes, but I have something he will never have. Exactly. Enough. It's so simple, but so profound. Because for so many people, especially those who achieve incredible wealth, there just seems to be no upper limit. The goalposts keep moving.
And the book gives some pretty stark examples of where that never enough mindset leads.
Oh, yeah. Tragic examples. Look at Rajat Gupta, former CEO of McKinsey, worth something like $100 million. An unimaginable amount for most people.
Right. Definitely enough by any normal standard.
But he went to prison for insider trading. Why? Because he wanted to be a billionaire. He said he wanted to be in that circle of even wealthier people. He literally risked what he did have and did need for what he didn't have and didn't need.
Just chasing the next level.
And it's the same pattern with Bernie Madoff or the hedge fund long-term capital management staffed by geniuses, Nobel laureates even, already worth tens or hundreds of millions. But they took such extreme risks chasing even more that they lost everything. As Buffett said about LTCM, to make money they didn't have and didn't need, they risked what they did have and did need. And that's foolish. It is just plain foolish.
That really highlights the danger of constantly moving the goalposts. As soon as you reach one financial target, a higher one just pops into view.
Exactly. And it's heavily fueled by social comparison. Constantly looking at what others have, a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year, objectively rich. But if he's playing next to Mike Trout, who signed a $430 million contract, suddenly he can feel broke.
Right.
And even Trout, making $36 million a year, might look at a hedge fund manager pulling in $340 million, or Jeff Bezos, whose net worth jumped $24 billion in 1 year.
It never ends.
It never ends. The ceiling of social comparison is just astronomically high. Virtually no one will ever hit it. It's a game you literally cannot win. There's that great quote from a Las Vegas dealer. The only way to win in a Las Vegas casino is to exit as soon as you enter.
Oh, okay.
Apply that logic to the game of keeping up with other people's wealth, and the message is pretty clear. Enough isn't about having too little or depriving yourself. It's realizing that an endless appetite for more will eventually push you to the point of regret, like eating until you're physically sick.
And this constant chase for more often leads people to risk things that are truly priceless, right? Things money can't buy back.
Absolutely. The book lists them. Your reputation, your freedom and independence, your family, your friends, love, happiness. Rajat Gupta, after prison, apparently said he learned not to get too attached to anything, your reputation, your accomplishments, or any of it. The author finds that the worst possible takeaway. These things are the things to be attached to.
Yeah, those are the real assets.
And your best shot at keeping them is knowing when to stop taking risks that could jeopardize them. Knowing when you have enough.
So how do you apply this? For you listening, how do you actually find your own sense of enough in a world that constantly screams more?
Okay, practical steps. First, you have to define your enough consciously. Sit down and figure out what enough means for you. Set clear financial goals that are independent of what your neighbor has or what you see on Instagram. Your goals based on your life.
Okay, define it for yourself. Makes sense. What else?
Second, Actively combat social comparison. Recognize it when you feel it bubbling up, that urge to keep up with the Joneses. Actively disengage. Remember the lottery ticket story? Not everyone starts from the same place or has the same opportunities. Understanding that can help free you from that endless, often unhappy chase.
Right. Stop playing someone else's game.
And finally, prioritize your invaluable assets. Focus your energy on protecting your reputation, your freedom, your relationships, your happiness. Know when to stop taking big financial risks. Recognize when you have enough to cover your needs and a good chunk of your wants. And don't jeopardize that foundation just for the possibility of having even more. That's where the danger lies.
Define your enough. Stop comparing. Protect what truly matters. That's powerful. It really shifts the focus.
It does. It's about cultivating patience, consistency, perspective. And speaking of patience, that brings us to maybe the most powerful force in finance, but also one of the most overlooked because it's just so counterintuitive: compounding.
Ugh, compounding. Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. But yeah, it's hard to really wrap your head around its power.
It really is. The book uses this great analogy of the ice ages.
Ice ages? How does that relate?
Well, Milutin-Milankovitch's theory, which is now widely accepted, explains ice ages through tiny, almost imperceptible, consistent changes in the Earth's tilt and orbit over tens of thousands of years.
Huh.
These tiny shifts mean slightly less summer sun hits certain latitudes, so the previous winter snow doesn't fully melt. It builds up year after year, century after century. A tiny bit more snow lasts each year.
And eventually?
Eventually, over millennia, you get miles-thick ice sheets covering continents. As one glaciologist put it, it is not necessarily the amount of snow that causes ice sheets, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts. You don't need massive force if something compounds relentlessly over time.
Wow. Okay, I see the connection. Small, consistent savings or returns over a very long time.
Exactly. That's precisely how it works with money. And the prime example, of course, is Warren Buffett. Thousands of books analyze his stock picks, his strategies. But the simplest, most crucial fact is often underplayed. His fortune isn't just because he's a good investor, it's because he's been a good investor since he was basically a kid.
Right, he started really young.
Unbelievably young. As of when the book was written, he had a net worth around $84.5 billion. Get this, $84.2 billion, that almost all of it was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
After 50, that's insane.
And $81.5 billion came after he qualified for Social Security in his mid-60s.
So the vast majority came very late in life.
It's staggering. The book runs a thought experiment. What if Buffett started later, like a normal person, say, had $25,000 saved by age 30? And then earned his amazing 22% annual returns, but retired at 60, also like many normal people.
Okay, what would his net worth be?
About $11.9 million.
Still a lot, but...
But it's 99.9% less than his actual net worth. His skill is investing, yes, but his undeniable secret weapon, the real magic, it's time. Decades and decades of time for compounding to work.
That really puts it in perspective. Longevity is key.
And it gets even more counterintuitive when you compare him to others. Buffett actually isn't the investor with the highest average annual returns.
Really? Who beat him?
Jim Simons, founder of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, he's compounded money at an astonishing 66% per year since 1988. That's 3 times Buffett's rate.
66%. Okay, so he must be way richer than Buffett then.
Nope. His net worth is around $21 billion, which is incredible, obviously, but it's about 75% less rich than Buffett.
How is that possible with triple the returns?
Time. Simons didn't really hit his investing stride until he was 50, so he had less than half the time for that incredible 66% return to compound compared to Buffett's much longer runway. The book calculates that if Simons had earned 66% a year for the same 70-year span as Buffett, his net worth would be some absurd number involving quintillions and quadrillions. It's meaningless, but it shows how small changes in growth, multiplied by enough time, lead to results that are just beyond human intuition.
It really highlights how bad our brains are at grasping exponential growth compared to simple addition.
Totally. If I ask you to calculate 8 plus 8 plus 8 9 times, you can do that pretty easily in your head. It's 72. But if I ask you to calculate 8 times 8 times 8, 9 times, your brain just shuts down. It's 134 million. Our intuition just isn't built for that kind of exponential leap. Think about computer hard drives. From 3.5 megabytes in the 1950s to 100 terabytes now, that's 30 million times larger. Even Bill Gates, back in 2004, apparently questioned why Gmail needed a whole gigabyte of storage. His thinking was anchored in the past. Even though he was Bill Gates, you just never quite get used to compounding's power.
Okay, so the message is clear. Compounding is incredibly powerful but non-intuitive, and time is the magic ingredient. How do you, listening, harness this magic in your own financial life? What are the practical steps?
All right, two main things again. First, and maybe most importantly, cultivate patience and consistency. Realize that good investing isn't necessarily about earning the highest returns. You don't need to be Jim Simons hitting 66%. It's about earning pretty good returns that you can stick with and which can be repeated for the longest period of time. Prioritize consistent, long-term saving and investing. Forget chasing quick, dramatic gains or trying to perfectly time the market. The real power comes from just staying invested and letting time do the heavy lifting.
Okay, patience and consistency. Don't chase highs, just stick with it. And the second thing,
Start early, even if it's small amounts. Consistent contributions over a long period can lead to truly extraordinary results. Why? Because those earliest years of compounding are the most powerful. They have the longest time to grow and regrow.
Yeah.
The sooner you start, the more time you give that snowball to roll down the hill. It's not about making a killing overnight. It's about showing up consistently and letting that relentless arithmetic work for you over decades.
start early, be patient, stay consistent. Sounds simple, but maybe not easy in practice.
Definitely not easy. Which brings us to another crucial point. We've talked a lot about getting wealthy, but that's only half the equation, isn't it?
What's the other half?
Staying wealthy. The book makes this vital distinction. There are tons of ways to get wealthy, but really only one way to stay wealthy.
And what's that?
It's some combination of frugality and paranoia, focusing intensely on not wiping out. It's a skill that's often totally overlooked.
Frugality and paranoia. Interesting combo. Can you give an example?
Look at Jesse Livermore, legendary stock trader. In the 1929 crash, he shorted the market and made the inflation-adjusted equivalent of over $3 billion.
$3 billion in 1929.
Unfathomable success. While his family was celebrating, another guy, Abraham Germansky, a multi-millionaire real estate developer, was totally ruined by the same crash. Died broke. So Livermore was amazing at getting wealthy.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is. 4 years later, Livermore, apparently full of hubris and overconfidence, started making bigger and bigger bets. Got leveraged up to his eyeballs, lost everything, eventually took his own life. So both Germansky and Livermore were incredible at getting rich, but equally terrible at staying rich. The lesson applies to everyone, no matter your income. Getting money and keeping it require totally different skills.
How so?
Getting money often involves taking risks, being optimistic, putting yourself out there, but keeping money, that requires the opposite. It demands humility, acknowledging that luck probably played a role, and having a healthy dose of fear, paranoia, even that what you've built can vanish just as quickly.
And capitalism itself is pretty ruthless when it comes to staying power.
Absolutely brutal. The book cites data showing that something like 40% of all publicly traded companies eventually lost effectively all of their value over time. They just disappear or go bankrupt.
40%, that's huge.
Yeah. And even the Forbes 400 list, the richest people, it sees about 20% turnover every single decade. People fall off. This isn't just about making dumb mistakes. It's the inherent fragility of success, especially rapid success. Michael Moritz, the billionaire head of the venture capital firm Sequoia Capital, nailed it. When asked why Sequoia had been so successful for 4 decades, he didn't say, "We're smart," or "We find winners." He said, "I think we've always been afraid of going out of business."
Afraid of going out of business.
Yep.
Even Sequoia.
Yep. His motto, famously borrowed from Andy Grove at Intel, "Only the paranoid survive." It's not about resting on your laurels. It's about the discipline to just stick around for a long, long time without getting wiped out. That ability to endure should be the cornerstone of anyone's financial strategy.
And when you look at Buffett again through this lens,
Exactly. His enduring success isn't just his stock picks. It's maybe even more about what he didn't do. He didn't get carried away with debt. He didn't panic and sell during the 14 recessions he's lived through. He didn't ruin his reputation. He didn't get rigidly stuck on one strategy. He didn't burn out. He just survived.
survival gave him longevity.
And longevity is what allowed compounding to perform its miracles. Investing consistently from age 10 to nearly 90. That's the key.
There's another story in the book about a third partner with Buffett and Munger.
Right. Rick Guerin.
Yeah, Rick Guerin. Buffett apparently said Guerin was just as smart as us, a brilliant investor, but Buffett added he was in a hurry.
In a hurry. What happened? In the nasty market downturn of 1973-74, Guerin had used margin loans borrowed money to invest. When the market tanked, he got margin calls and was forced to sell his Berkshire Hathaway stock back to Buffett at a huge loss. He got wiped out because he couldn't survive the downturn. As Nassim Taleb says, having an edge and surviving are two different things. The first requires the second. You need to avoid ruin at all costs. Getting wealthy means nothing if you can't stay wealthy.
Okay, the survival mindset is critical.
Yeah.
How do you, listening, actually implement this? What are the tangible steps for your life?
All right, 3 key things for the survival mindset. First, prioritize financial unbreakability. More than chasing the absolute highest returns, aim to be financially unbreakable. What does that mean practically?
Like a big emergency fund.
That's a huge part of it. Having enough cash on hand maybe more than feels optimal to prevent you from ever being forced to sell your investments at the worst possible time, like during a market crash. Cash might only earn 1% when stocks are soaring at 10%, which feels inefficient. But if that cash buffer saves you from selling low in panic, the actual return on that cash becomes immense. It keeps you in the game. Compounding needs uninterrupted time, especially through chaos.
Okay, be unbreakable. Have that buffer. What's next?
Second, plan for the unexpected, or as the book puts it, plan on the plan not going according to plan. Accept that the future is full of unknowns you can't predict. So build room for error, what investors call a margin of safety, into everything. Your budget, your savings rate, your investment expectations, your timelines.
How's that work?
It could mean saving a higher percentage of your income than you think you strictly need. It could mean assuming lower investment returns in your retirement projections. It means having flexibility. This isn't about being overly conservative. It's about increasing your odds of surviving and thriving across a wider range of possible futures. It lets you live happily with a range of outcomes, not just one perfect scenario.
Plan for things to go wrong, build in that cushion. Got it. And the third?
Finally, cultivate a barbelled personality.
A barbelled personality. What?
It's holding 2 seemingly contradictory views at the same time. Be optimistic about the future, but paranoid about what will prevent you from getting to the future. You can be and should be confident about long-term progress and economic growth. History generally supports that. But you also need to be acutely aware that the short-term path to that future is filled with landmines, recessions, crashes, unexpected personal setbacks.
So long-term optimism, short-term paranoia.
Exactly. The U.S. economy has grown massively over 170 years, right? Despite huge wars, depressions, countless crises, 99.9% of companies going bust. Progress happens. But you have to survive the short-term chaos to benefit from the long-term growth. Jesse Livermore learned that the hard way good times made him feel invincible, led to overconfidence, which is ultimately fatal financially. This balanced mindset helps you take necessary risks while staying vigilant against total ruin.
Unbreakable. Plan for error, barbelled personality. That's a solid framework for staying in the game.
Absolutely. And staying in the game, having that survival mindset, allows you to eventually benefit from what money really buys you. Which leads us to our next point.
Which is, what does money really buy, if not just more stuff or higher status?
Freedom. Control over your time. The book makes a really compelling case that the highest form of wealth isn't a bigger house or a faster car. It's the ability to wake up each morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. That autonomy, that control, it argues, is priceless. It's the greatest dividend money actually pays.
That really resonates. And there's research to back that up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The book cites work by psychologist Angus Campbell, who found something profound back in the 80s. He discovered that having a strong sense of controlling one's life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any of the objective conditions of life we have considered.
Wow. More dependable than your salary, your house size, your job title.
More dependable than any of those objective measures. It's the feeling of being in control of your own life that correlates most strongly with happiness. And money's greatest intrinsic value, the book argues, is its ability to give you that control bit by bit.
How does that play out in real life? What does that independence look like day to day?
Well, think about it on a spectrum. A small amount of wealth, a little savings, means you can take a few sick days from work without worrying about the lost pay. That's a little bit of control. A bit more wealth, maybe a solid emergency fund, means if you get laid off, you can wait for a genuinely good job offer instead of feeling forced to grab the very first thing that comes along just to pay the bills. That's more control. 6 months of expenses saved up. Maybe that means you don't constantly fear your boss because you know you wouldn't be ruined financially if you had to leave and find something new. Even more control.
Right, it buys you options.
Exactly. And further down the line, it's the freedom to maybe take a lower paying job that offers more flexibility or purpose, or the ability to retire when you choose to, not just when the calendar or your finances dictate. Using money to buy time and options provides a lifestyle benefit that honestly very few luxury goods can ever match.
I can totally relate to this from personal experience. Early in my career, I really wanted to be an investment banker. Why? Honestly, the money. It seemed like the path to being rich.
A common motivation.
Definitely. I landed a summer internship, thought I'd hit the jackpot. But day one, I realized why they paid so much. The hours were insane. Longer, more controlled hours than I even knew was possible. Going home before midnight felt like a holiday.
Wow.
And the thing is, the work itself. It was interesting. Intellectually stimulating, paid well, felt prestigious. But my schedule was completely dictated by my boss. Every waking second felt like it belonged to the bank.
Sounds intense.
It turned into one of the most miserable experiences of my life. Even though I technically liked the tasks I was doing, it taught me a huge lesson. Doing something you love, but on a schedule you absolutely cannot control, can feel just as bad as doing something you hate.
That's fascinating. It's what psychologists call reactance, right? That feeling of resistance when control is taken away.
Exactly. And it doesn't just apply to jobs. Think about why super strict, rigid budgets often fail. We instinctively push back against feeling overly controlled, even if it's by our own financial goals. That reactance can derail even the best intentions if we don't build in flexibility and a sense of agency.
That's so true. And that idea is captured beautifully by the entrepreneur Derek Sivers. When people ask him how he got rich, he doesn't talk about selling his company, CD Baby, for millions.
What does he talk about?
He talks about saving up $12,000 by the time he was 22. That $12,000 allowed him to quit his minimum wage job and become a full-time musician. He says that freedom, that control over his time bought by those savings, was the real difference in his life. Not the millions that came later. The money bought him control first.
That's a great story. Control first. But it seems like as a society, especially in wealthy countries, we've maybe gone the other way.
There's definitely evidence for that. Look at the U.S., richest nation in history, right? Study after study shows Americans aren't significantly happier than they were back in the 1950s, despite having vastly more material wealth, bigger houses, more cars, more bathrooms than people sometimes.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, a 2019 Gallup poll found nearly half of Americans reported a lot of worry, and over half reported a lot of stress the previous day, higher than the global average. One theory is that while we've used our wealth to buy more stuff, many of us, especially knowledge workers, have simultaneously given up control over our time.
How so?
Our work tools are portable now, laptops, smartphones, the factory is the day itself. Work can follow us everywhere, blur into personal time. So while material wealth went up, that crucial sense of control over our time, a key driver of happiness, may have actually gone down for many.
That makes a lot of sense. We traded time for stuff, maybe without realizing the cost to well-being.
And this is echoed in studies of the elderly. Gerontologist Carl Pilmer interviewed 1,000 older Americans about life lessons. Not a single one said that happiness came from working hard to make money to buy things they wanted. Not one said it was important to be at least as wealthy as the people around them.
So what do they value?
They valued quality friendships, being part of something bigger than themselves, having purpose, and spending quality, unstructured time with their children. Those were the things that led to a life well lived, according to them, not the accumulation of wealth for its own sake or for consumption.
Friendships, purpose, time with loved ones. Okay, so how do you translate this into action? For your financial choices, how do you prioritize this kind of real wealth?
Okay, two clear actions here. First, consciously prioritize time over things. Actively use your money to buy time and options, not just more luxury goods. When you're considering a purchase or a job or a financial commitment, ask yourself, how does this impact my control over my day? Does this purchase truly buy me more freedom, or does it just add more payments and obligations?
That's a great filter to evaluate based on time impact. And the second action.
Align your spending with true happiness. Reflect honestly on what genuinely contributes to your well-being. Is it really the next gadget, or is it experiences, relationships, learning, having the freedom to pursue a passion? Shift your financial focus away from just acquiring more stuff and towards cultivating that freedom, nurturing relationships, and finding purpose, the things those wise elders identified as the real sources of a happy life. Use money as a tool to build that life, not just to accumulate possessions.
Prioritize time, align spending with what actually makes you happy.
Got it. And speaking of what truly matters, what does real wealth actually look like if it's not the flashy car?
Right. If it's not the visible stuff, then what is it? This brings us to another really critical counterintuitive point. True wealth is often invisible. It's hidden.
Hidden. How so? It's the income you don't spend. It's the assets you haven't converted into flashy possessions yet. Wealth is the car not bought, the diamond not purchased, the first-class upgrade skipped. It's the money working for you silently in investments rather than being displayed outwardly. The danger, of course, is that we humans are visual creatures. We judge wealth by what we see, and that leads us down the wrong path, chasing the wrong goals.
It's such a common trap. I remember reading about that valet, the guy colleagues called Roger, who drove this fancy Porsche.
Yeah.
Everyone just assumed, wow, this guy must be loaded.
Right, the car screamed rich.
But then one day, he shows up driving this beat-up old Honda. What happened to the Porsche? Repossessed. He wasn't rich. He was stretched thin making payments.
Exactly. The only thing you truly know for sure about someone driving a $100,000 car is that they have $100,000 less money than they did before they bought it. Or $100,000 more debt. That's it.
Huh. Good point.
We see the cars, the big houses, the perfect Instagram vacations, and we use these outward signs to gauge financial success. But they are often incredibly misleading indicators of actual wealth.
So if visible spending isn't wealth, what is?
The book puts it starkly, wealth is what you don't see. It's the nice cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, the watches not worn. It's financial assets that haven't yet been converted into the stuff you see. There's that great story about the singer Rihanna nearly going bankrupt from overspending early in her career. Her financial advisor apparently asked her, almost incredulously, was it really necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
You'd think that's obvious, but...
But the book points out, yes, for many people, it does need to be said. When someone says, I want to be a millionaire, what they often actually mean is, I'd like to spend $1 million. Which is literally the opposite of being a millionaire. Being a millionaire means having the million, not having spent it.
That distinction is crucial. So how do we define rich versus wealthy?
Rich is a current income. Someone driving that $100,000 car, they're probably rich, meaning they have enough income to afford the payments, the insurance, the gas. Rich people often make themselves known. The spending is visible. Wealth, however, is hidden. It's income not spent. Wealth is the money you haven't spent yet. It represents options not yet taken, flexibility not yet used, future purchases not yet made. Its value lies in providing security, growth, and control over time.
I like the diet and exercise analogy the book uses.
Me too. Exercise, being active, doing the work, that's like being rich. You're generating income, you're busy. But wealth is like turning down that treat meal and actually burning net calories. It's the gap you create between what you could consume and what you actually choose to consume. That gap, saved and invested, is what builds wealth over time. It's subtraction, not just addition.
And the problem is, it's easy to find rich role models. They're everywhere, showing off the results of their income.
Exactly. But it's much harder to find wealthy role models because by definition, their success, the unspent money, the investments, is largely hidden from view. Remember Ronald Reed, the janitor who died with $8 million? While he was alive, sweeping floors, nobody looked at him and thought, there's my financial role model. His wealth was completely invisible until his death. It's hard to learn from or be inspired by what you can't see. That makes building wealth, the hidden kind, much more challenging for many people.
Okay, so if true wealth is invisible, built by not spending, how do you actually live this way? How do you pursue something that doesn't offer immediate visible gratification? What are the actions for you listening?
All right, several key things here. First, and most fundamentally, embrace frugality. Not necessarily deprivation, but consciously choosing to spend money you have and to not spend money you don't have. It sounds basic, but the only way to actually accumulate wealth is to not spend the money that you do have. You have to create that gap between earning and spending.
Simple, but maybe the hardest part. Okay, embrace frugality. What else?
Second, redefine your role models. Understand that it is easy to find rich role models. It's harder to find wealthy ones because their success is more hidden. Seek out examples of quiet, consistent accumulation, not just flashy consumption. And this ties into humility. The book suggests one of the most powerful ways to increase your savings isn't necessarily raising your income, but raising your humility. Reducing the desire to spend just to signal status to others frees up more money for actual wealth building.
Less ego, more wealth. I like that. What's next?
Third, prioritize your savings rate. Recognize that building wealth has little to do with your income or investment returns, and lots to do with your savings rate. Someone earning $50,000 but saving 20% might build more wealth over time than someone earning $150,000 but saving only 5%. Your savings rate is more directly controllable than market returns or huge income leaps. Viewing savings as the gap between your ego and your income can be a powerful mental frame to help increase that rate.
Focus on the savings rate, control the ego gap. Got it. Anything else?
Yes, one more related point, save without a specific goal.
Really? We're always told to save for something, a house, retirement, a car.
Those are fine, but the book argues you should also save just for saving's sake. Why? Because that accumulated, unassigned wealth provides options and flexibility, the ability to wait, and the opportunity to pounce. It's your buffer against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment. That unseen return on wealth, the flexibility, the reduced stress, the control over time it gives you is truly incalculable.
Save just to save. Build that hidden flexibility. That's a really powerful idea. It connects back to freedom and surviving surprises.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. Which leads nicely into another concept that's both liberating and incredibly practical for navigating your financial life. Prioritizing being reasonable over being perfectly rational.
Reasonable over rational. Okay, unpack that. Aren't we supposed to be rational with money?
In theory, yes. But the book makes a crucial point. You are a human being, a screwed up, emotional person, as it colorfully puts it, not a perfectly logical spreadsheet. What looks like the optimal financial decision on paper can often be completely unreasonable in practice because of our emotions, our psychology, our real lives.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about that story of Dr. Wagner Jareg, who won a Nobel Prize for treating late-stage syphilis. His method, injecting patients with malaria.
Malaria. Why?
Because the high fevers induced by malaria could actually kill the syphilis bacteria. Medically, it was kind of rational. It addressed the underlying problem. But think about it from the patient's perspective. It was deeply unreasonable. Fevers are miserable, potentially dangerous. People don't want to feel awful, even if it's technically optimal for fighting the disease. A doctor's goal isn't just to cure, but to do so in a way the patient can actually tolerate. People will often choose to simply stop hurting over following a perfectly rational but unbearable plan.
Okay, I see the analogy. So how does that apply to finance?
Oh.
We're not injecting ourselves with malaria, hopefully.
Hopefully not. But think about investment advice. Harry Markowitz, another Nobel laureate, the father of modern portfolio theory, basically, the math behind diversification. How did he invest his own retirement money?
Let me guess, using his complex optimal formulas.
Nope. He split it 50-50 between stocks and bonds. Simple as that. Why? Not because it was mathematically optimal. He explicitly said it was to minimize future regret. He could imagine how awful he'd feel if the market soared and he wasn't in, or if it crashed and he was all in.
So he made an emotional decision, not purely rational.
He made a reasonable decision. He acknowledged his own human emotions. Investing isn't just done in a vacuum with a spreadsheet. It involves spouses, colleagues, real-life consequences. Your decisions are judged by human feelings, not just math. Markowitz wasn't irrational. He was being reasonable about his own psychology.
That makes sense. And the book gives an example of purely rational advice that's just absurd, right?
Yeah, that 2008 Yale study suggesting young savers use 2-to-1 leverage, basically, borrowing money to invest twice as much in stocks.
2-to-1 leverage. Sounds risky.
Extremely. On paper, the math worked. Even if a 50% market crash completely wiped you out temporarily, the study argued you'd likely end up with much more money decades later if you just picked themselves back up and stuck with the leverage strategy.
If. That's a big if.
Exactly. It's technically true, but contextually nonsense, as the book says. Can you imagine any normal person watching their entire life savings evaporate and just calmly saying, okay, time to start leveraging up again? No way. They'd quit investing, maybe sue their advisor. The expected retirement wealth might be higher on the spreadsheet, but the strategy is 100% less reasonable for actual humans.
So purely rational can be completely unrealistic. What's the benefit, then, of embracing seemingly irrational but reasonable approaches in your own investing?
The key is endurance. The book talks about the idea of loving your investments.
Loving them, that sounds unprofessional.
Yeah.
Like getting emotionally attached.
It does sound counterintuitive, right? But think about it. If being completely detached and rational about your strategy makes it more likely you'll ditch it the minute things get scary or tough, then that rational detachment actually becomes a liability. The reasonable investor, who maybe has a technically imperfect strategy, but one they genuinely believe in or feel connected to, they might have an edge simply because they're more likely to stick with it through thick and thin. Studies show a strong link between commitment during the lean years and better long-term results.
So that emotional connection provides staying power.
It can, yes. If you're passionate about a company's mission or you really believe in a particular sustainable investment approach, the inevitable market downturns might feel less terrifying. That underlying commitment can blunt the panic impulse and help you ride it out.
Okay, and this applies to other irrational things too, like maybe preferring investments closer to home.
Exactly. Home bias investing mostly in your own country isn't strictly rational from a global diversification standpoint. But if that familiarity makes you more comfortable actually investing and staying invested, especially during global turmoil, then it's a reasonable trade-off. Even things like dabbling in individual stock picking or day trading, which statistically don't work out well for most people. If doing that with a small part of your portfolio scratches an itch, keeps you engaged, and stops you from messing with your core long-term investments, maybe it's reasonable in moderation. Jack Bogle, the ultimate advocate for simple, low-cost index funds, apparently invested some of his own money in his son's high-fee hedge fund. Why? Family reasons. As he said, life isn't always consistent. Sometimes reasonable trumps rational.
Okay, so for you listening, how do you put reasonable over rational into practice?
First, design for endurance. Know yourself. Recognize your emotional triggers and limits. Craft a financial plan and investment strategy that you can realistically, psychologically stick with through market ups and downs. Don't just pick what looks best on a spreadsheet if you know deep down you'll bail when it drops 20%.
Design for your psychology, not just the math. Got it.
Second, find your commitment. If genuinely loving an investment or strategy, maybe it aligns with your values or you believe deeply in its long-term potential, helps provide the endurance necessary to stay the course during tough times, embrace that. That commitment itself can improve your odds.
Okay, find what you can commit to.
And third, embrace good enough. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Sometimes a reasonable approach that fits your human nature, helps you sleep at night, and keeps you invested consistently is far superior in the long run to a theoretically rational but ultimately unsustainable strategy that you abandon halfway through. Aim for reasonable endurance over perfect rationality.
Design for endurance, find commitment, embrace good enough. That feels like very practical, human-centered advice.
It is. And acknowledging our human nature, our emotions, our tendency towards the reasonable, that's also key when facing the future, which is inherently unpredictable.
Ah, yes, the unpredictability. As that Stanford professor Scott Sagan said, things that have never happened before happen all the time. History's a guide, maybe, but definitely not a perfect map to the future.
Exactly, which is why building room for error, that margin of safety we touched on, isn't just a conservative tactic. It's absolutely essential for survival and long-term success in a world full of surprises.
It's a fundamental paradox, isn't it? We use history to understand the world, but history's most important lessons often come from the complete surprises, the outliers that had no real precedent.
Totally. Investing isn't like physics, with immutable laws. Richard Feynman, the physicist, once joked, imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings. Well, investors do have feelings, lots of them. Fear, greed, panic, FOMO. That makes predicting market behavior based purely on past data incredibly difficult. As Daniel Kahneman put it, the world is difficult to anticipate. The world is surprising. We should expect surprises.
And it's not just about emotions messing things up. The actual structure of the financial world keeps changing, making old data less relevant, right?
Absolutely. Think about the structural changes. The 401k and Roth IRA are relatively new kids on the block, changing how millions save. Venture capital is a major force, barely existed 25, 30 years ago. The S&P 500 index itself looks totally different today. Financials and tech dominate now in ways they didn't before. Even the pattern of U.S. recessions has changed, longer periods between them now, but maybe the downturns are sharper when they hit. Benjamin Graham's specific stock valuation formulas from the 1930s, largely outdated today because things changed. Relying too rigidly on historical data as a map can make you completely miss the unexpected cliff ahead, the outlier events that actually move the needle the most.
So, if the future is fundamentally surprising, how do you navigate it? How do you prepare?
Through room for error, margin of safety. Think about professional blackjack card counters. Even when they know the odds are slightly in their favor, they don't bet everything on one hand.
Why not?
because they know short-term luck can swing wildly against them. They need a large cash buffer. The book mentions at least 100 basic units of their standard bet just to withstand the inevitable swings of bad luck and stay in the game long enough for their edge to pay off. They have to plan on their plan not going according to plan.
Okay, so room for error isn't just about being cautious, it's about survival.
Precisely. And Benjamin Graham's most profound insight about margin of safety wasn't just about buying stocks cheap. It was this. The purpose of the margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary.
Render the forecast unnecessary.
If you build enough cushion into your plan, lower return expectations, higher savings, less debt, you don't need to predict the future perfectly. You can endure a range of possible outcomes, including disappointing ones, and still be okay. You survive the surprises.
But this idea seems underappreciated and misunderstood, as the book says. People often see it as just being timid or conservative.
Right, but it's actually the opposite. Having that margin of safety increases your chances of survival, which is the absolute prerequisite for compounding to work its magic over the long haul. You have to stay in the game. Look at Bill Gates again. Even when Microsoft was young and scrappy, he apparently took an incredibly conservative approach to cash, insisting they always keep enough money in the bank to cover a year's worth of payroll, even if they had zero revenue coming in.
A whole year's payroll.
Wow. Yeah. And Buffett has a similar pledge to always run Berkshire with more than ample cash. This isn't just about avoiding bankruptcy. It's also about avoiding the emotional toll. Having that buffer reduces the agonizing stress during downturns, the sleepless nights, wondering if the investment decisions you've made were a mistake that will hurt their future. It buys peace of mind, which helps you stick to the plan.
That makes sense. It's an emotional buffer, too. What about taking risks? We need some risk to grow, right?
Absolutely. But margin of safety helps you manage the consequences of risk. There's this dangerous optimism bias in risk-taking. The book calls it the Russian roulette should statistically work syndrome.
Huh. Okay, explain that.
Russian roulette has a 5 out of 6 chance of success on any given pull, right? Statistically favorable. But is the potential upside worth the catastrophic, irreversible downside of the 1 in 6 chance? Absolutely not. You have to take some risk to get ahead financially. But you should never take any risk that has the potential to wipe you out completely, no matter how attractive the odds seem. Leverage borrowing heavily is the main culprit here. It can turn a routine market dip, which is survivable, into a personal financial catastrophe, forcing you out of the game at the worst possible moment. The ability to remain standing long enough for your risks to pay off is everything. Avoid ruin at all costs.
Okay, avoid ruinous risk. And room for error also protects against totally bizarre, unforeseen stuff, right? Like those mice.
Exactly. That story about the German tanks in WWII during the Battle of Stalingrad. They were technologically superior, but thousands were apparently immobilized because field mice had chewed through the electrical insulation in their wiring while they sat idle. Totally unforeseeable, yet devastating.
Wow, mice versus tanks.
It shows that sometimes the biggest risks are things you'd never, ever put on a spreadsheet. Startups face this all the time. A flood, a key supplier going bust, a CEO having a breakdown. Unforeseeable, maybe, but potentially existential. That's why saving, not just for known goals, house, retirement, but also saving for things you can't possibly predict or even comprehend, the financial equivalent of field mice, is so critical. It's your ultimate contingency fund.
Okay, this concept of room for error, margin of safety, is clearly crucial. How do you, listening, actively build this into your financial life? What are the practical steps?
All right, 4 key actions here. First, build your buffer. Actively create a substantial margin of safety in your finances. This means different things for different people, but it could involve having a larger emergency fund than conventional wisdom suggests, keeping debt levels low, or simply using conservative assumptions when you plan maybe projecting future investment returns at, say, 1/3 lower than the historical average. That way, if reality turns out better, you're pleasantly surprised, not dangerously disappointed.
Build that buffer. Assume things might be tougher than the past.
Okay.
Second, prepare for unknown unknowns. Save money not just for specific predictable goals, but save explicitly for things you can't possibly predict or even comprehend. Think of it as saving for surprises, for the financial equivalent of those field mice. This is your ultimate flexibility fund, your resilience capital.
Save for surprises. I like that. Third,
Avoid ruin. Embrace calculated risks to grow your wealth, absolutely. But be relentlessly, paranoidly focused on avoiding any risk that could wipe you out entirely. Remember, survival is the prerequisite for all long-term success. Being forced out of the game is the worst possible outcome. Leverage is the primary driver of ruin for most investors, and businesses use it with extreme caution, if at all.
Avoid the knockout blow. Makes sense. And lastly, develop that paranoia and optimism combo. Cultivate the barbelled personality we talked about. Maintain long-term optimism about progress, growth, and your ability to reach your goals. But balance it with short-term paranoia about all the things that could go wrong along the way. This mindset keeps you grounded, prepared, and resilient enough to stay the course through the inevitable bumps.
Build a buffer, save for surprises, avoid ruin, balance optimism and paranoia.
Got it. That feels like a very robust approach to dealing with uncertainty.
It is. And being grounded in your own plan, your own reality, is also crucial for navigating our final topic.
It is.
The peril of misguided influence. How easily our financial actions can be swayed, often for the worse, by watching others who are playing a completely different game than we are. This leads to bad decisions and a lot of unnecessary dissatisfaction.
Keeping up with the Joneses, but in the investment world. Exactly. But it's often more subtle than just envy. Investors have vastly different goals and, crucially, different time horizons. Think back to the dot-com bubble in 1999. A day trader might buy Yahoo stock at some insane valuation, like a zillion times revenue, to a long-term value investor that looks utterly ridiculous.
Completely irrational.
But for the day trader, whose game was just to ride the short-term momentum and sell it for a small profit before lunchtime, it made perfect sense to them. Their time horizon was hours, not years.
Okay, different games, different rules.
Precisely. Or the housing bubble in the mid-2000s. People flipping houses, buying with the intention of selling quickly for a profit they could rationally justify paying very high prices. They didn't care about the long-term rental value or affordability. Their game was purely short-term speculation. They were playing a different game than someone buying a home to live in for 30 years.
And this applies to financial advice we hear too, right?
Oh, absolutely. When some talking head on TV shouts, "You should buy this stock," who are they talking to? They have no idea who you are listening right now. Are you a teenager learning to invest with birthday money? Are you a retiree on a fixed income needing stability? Are you a hedge fund manager juggling complex derivatives? It's completely crazy to assume those three people should buy the same stock at the same price because their goals, risk tolerance, and time horizons are wildly different.
But it's hard to remember that in the moment.
It's incredibly hard. We tend to anchor to our own view of what's rational, and rising prices, seeing others seemingly succeed, can act like a drug. It subtly persuades us to join in, even if we're following signals from people playing a totally different game, a game that's irrelevant or even dangerous for us.
And this misguided influence isn't just about investing. It's huge in consumer spending too, right? The social comparison trap again.
Massive. So much spending, especially in wealthy countries, is driven by social comparison. We buy things, often subconsciously influenced by people we admire or want to emulate, hoping that owning those things will bring us respect and admiration.
But does it work?
Rarely as much as we think. The book introduces the brilliant man-in-the-car paradox. When you see someone driving a really expensive, cool car, what do you usually think?
Probably. Wow, that's a nice car. Maybe I wish I had that car.
Exactly. You rarely think, wow, the person driving that car is so cool and impressive. Instead, you think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool.
That's so true. We project ourselves into it.
We do. Subconsciously, other people are using your expensive purchase primarily as a benchmark for their own desires and aspirations. They're probably admiring the item, not you personally. The admiration you crave is often misdirected onto the object itself.
So buying flashy stuff to gain respect is kind of a losing game.
Largely, yes. If respect and admiration are what you're truly after, the book argues you're far more likely to achieve them through qualities like humility, kindness, and empathy than through horsepower or expensive logos. Those internal qualities resonate more deeply than external displays.
That's a great reminder. Kindness over consumerism. How does this tie into believing things that maybe aren't true?
It connects to what the book calls appealing fictions. When we really desperately want something to be true, like, this stock I bought is definitely going to the moon, we become much more susceptible to believing stories and narratives that confirm that desire, even if the objective odds are low.
Confirmation bias, basically.
Exactly. It's why financial quackery persists. Think about TV commentators making bold predictions, or Bernie Madoff promising impossibly consistent returns, or even why actively managed mutual funds continue to attract trillions of dollars when studies consistently show the vast majority underperform simple, low-cost index funds over time.
People want to believe they can beat the market or find the next genius.
Precisely. People want to believe there's a shortcut, an edge, a secret. And our own incentives, our desire for a specific outcome, can powerfully warp our perception of reality and make us vulnerable to stories that feel good but aren't necessarily true.
Okay, this peril of misguided influence from other investors playing different games, from social comparison, from appealing fictions, is clearly dangerous. How do you protect yourself? How can you, listening, stay true to your own path?
3 key actions to wrap this up. First, and maybe most importantly, define your game. Explicitly figure out your financial goals, your time horizon, your personal risk tolerance. Don't just vaguely think about it, write it down. Create your own personal financial mission statement.
Why write it down?
Because that written statement acts as a powerful filter. When you see market news or hear a stock tip or see what someone else is doing, you can hold it up against your written game plan and ask, is this relevant to my game? It helps you instantly tune out the noise and ignore actions or advice that simply don't apply to you.
Define your game, write it down, use it as a filter. Smart. What's second?
Second, beware of imitation, especially in spending. Recognize that so much consumerism is driven by that social comparison trap, the man-in-the-car paradox. If genuine respect and admiration are what you seek, focus on cultivating humility, kindness, and empathy. Those qualities tend to earn more lasting esteem than any possession ever could.
Seek respect through character, not consumption. Got it. And finally,
filter information critically. Always consider the source. Don't let the actions or advice of others, especially those with different incentives, like someone paid to sell you something, or vastly different time horizons, like a day trader, dictate your financial decisions. Just because someone else is playing a different game, making different moves according to their rules, doesn't mean those moves make any sense for you and your unique financial journey. Stay laser-focused on your own mission.
define your game, beware imitation, filter critically. That's a great defense against getting sidetracked.
Absolutely. It helps you stay grounded in your own reality.
Wow. We've covered a ton of ground today. So many counterintuitive but really powerful ideas about money and, more importantly, about ourselves.
We really have, and I think the fundamental truth that ties all these threads together is this. Financial advice just cannot be one size fits all. It can't be. Just like a good doctor doesn't just prescribe the optimal treatment on paper, but empowers the patient to choose based on their own values, their own tolerance for side effects, what they can reasonably endure. You have to be the one to decide how to apply these universal truths about money psychology to your unique life, your situation, your temperament.
Absolutely. These aren't rigid rules or commandments. They're insights, tools, ways of thinking designed to help you make better, more conscious, more reasonable decisions with your money. And ultimately, what seems to bind all these insights together is recognizing that real financial success is less about what you know, the formulas, the jargon, and so much more about how you behave, who you are.
That's it, exactly. It's about cultivating humility when things go well and forgiveness when they inevitably go wrong, because luck and risk are always playing their part. It's never as good or as bad as it seems in the moment. Focus your energy on what you can actually control, your savings rate, your reactions, your patience.
It's about understanding that saving, building wealth, is fundamentally about managing the gap between your ego, that desire to spend, to show off, to keep up, and your income. Wealth is built quietly, by controlling what you could spend today, in order to have more options, more flexibility, more freedom tomorrow.
And accepting imperfection. Getting comfortable with the idea that many things in your financial life, many individual investments will probably go wrong or underperform. That's normal. Success often comes from just a small minority of things doing really well over time. Judge your financial health by your overall progress and resilience, not by every single up and down along the way.
And critically, using your money intentionally to buy time, not just things. Remembering that control over your time, the freedom to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, that's consistently shown to be the highest dividend money pays. It's a universal predictor of happiness, far more than the size of your house.
And if you seek respect and admiration from others, remember the man-in-the-car paradox. Pursue it through kindness and humility, not flashy consumption. Possessions rarely impress others as much as we imagine, and they often just become benchmarks for their desires, not admiration for you.
Don't forget to save for saving's sake. Build that buffer not just for predictable goals, but as your ultimate hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment. It's your flexibility fund, your peace of mind account.
And learn to embrace the fees of investing. Market volatility, corrections, crashes, the fear and uncertainty that come with them. Those aren't fines for doing something wrong. They are the necessary, unavoidable fees you pay for the potential of long-term compounding gains. Be willing to pay that price to stay in the market.
And always, always worship room for error. That margin of safety, that buffer, is what allows you to endure the unexpected, to survive the tough times, which is absolutely crucial for compounding to work its long-term magic. Assume the future might be harder than the past and build in that cushion accordingly.
Recognize that you'll change over time. The end of history illusion suggests we underestimate how much our values and desires will evolve. So avoid extremes in your financial planning today. Don't be so austere that you make your present self miserable, but don't be so focused on maximizing income that you sacrifice all your time and health. Seek balance, knowing your future self might want different things.
Embrace prudent risk, but avoid ruinous risk. Take calculated chances that have the potential to pay off over time, but be absolutely paranoid about any risk, especially leverage that could wipe you out completely. Survival is the name of the game.
And finally, constantly define your game. Know your goals, your time horizon, your tolerance for risk. Write it down. Filter out the noise. Don't get sucked into playing someone else's game with different rules. And respect the mess. Recognize there's often no single right answer in finance. Smart, informed people can reasonably disagree. The goal isn't perfection. It's finding what works for you, what helps you sleep at night, and what keeps you on track towards your definition of a life well lived.
We've navigated some truly fascinating and, often counterintuitive ideas about money today. It's just so clear that true financial success isn't just about what's in your head, but profoundly about how you behave, your actions, your temperament, your perspective.
So as you reflect on all these insights, maybe ask yourself, what might be the one most impactful change you could make in your daily financial life, starting today? Perhaps it's shifting your focus away from chasing the highest possible returns and towards building that truly unbreakable financial foundation. Or maybe it's internalizing the idea that the greatest wealth isn't what people see, but the unseen freedom and control you build with the money you don't spend.
In a world that's constantly tempting us with instant gratification, with comparing ourselves to others, with the allure of visible success, what's your personal definition of true financial freedom? And what unseen sacrifices, what shifts in behavior are you willing to make today to achieve that freedom tomorrow?
We really hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about, plenty to chew on. Remember, the journey to being smarter about money, to achieving financial well-being, is ultimately deeply a journey of understanding yourself.